Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. And as you can see from the map, it states it is June 4th. Obviously, it is not June 4th, but there will be a method to my madness here shortly. Now, we are getting closer and closer to the July 11th meeting of NATO leadership in Vilnius, Lithuania, where we expect further NATO war planning against the Russian Federation. Now, what is that going to look like post-meeting? Difficult to say. But a lot of what is going to be discussed is what you're looking at on the map. The ramifications of what occurred from June 4th to today is going to be discussed. The defeat of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, especially within the confines of Zaporizhia to Volodar, has shaken the NATO leadership, at least the political elements within NATO. I believe that the military leadership here in the United States, the military leadership in other Western European nation states, had a understanding of what was going to happen, especially when you go into a large offensive operation without air support, without an air force. While at the same time, you're attacking a very well-dug-in enemy force, opposing force, with multiple defensive lines, more heavy artillery than the offensive force, more, obviously, air power than the offensive force, and even more personnel on the ground in certain areas than the offensive force or the Ukrainian forces. So it was really a no-win situation for the Ukrainians, and I think going into this, they were waging that the morale of Russian forces would have been degraded, and they were hoping that the Russian lines would break. And unfortunately for the Ukrainians, that did not occur. And the Ukrainians have taken large numbers of casualties in this ongoing offensive. Now let's look at what exactly has happened over the last month as the Ukrainians tried to break through areas south of Zaporizhia, south of Orikhiv, heavy fighting in this area. And let's see exactly what has been accomplished by this offensive operation. Now look, again, the black lines are areas where the Russians have dug in. And obviously you have observation posts closer to the line of contact. You have reconnaissance elements of Russian forces closer to the line of contact, smaller defensive positions closer to the line of contact. Then you have the main line, and then you have secondary lines and even third lines of defense around areas such as Tokmak and some of the larger settlements and cities. So let's move forward. We're June 4th, and this is the offensive has begun. So we have up here, obviously the Ukrainians move forward a couple of 100 meters in an open field. We're at June 11th now. You can see the Ukrainians trying to push near Velkia Novosilka, south of Orikhiv. This is one of the locations where we saw all those Bradleys and Leopard 2 main battle tanks destroyed in that open field and getting caught in those minefields. So we're now June 20th. June 20th. And by June 24th, 10 days into the offensive, or actually more than that, I'm sorry, the Ukrainians were hoping to have broken through the main Russian defensive lines. And at this point, they were hoping to be on the outskirts of Bakhmut. And at this point, June 24th, the Ukrainians were hoping that the Russian lines would start to collapse. And the main objective for Ukrainian forces was this pincer movement from Orikhiv and just south of Zaporizhia along this route to move towards Melitopol, envelop, encircle Melitopol, and then seize control of it. That was the objective. Alternate objectives were a fast move down south towards Berdyansk as well. Again, the Ukrainians were hoping that the Russian lines would just fall apart. Here we go, continuing. And by the end of June, it was very well established that the Ukrainian offensive had failed. So let's not kid ourselves, okay? The Ukrainian objective, if you look at other content providers who were discussing this conflict, remember originally the counteroffensive was scheduled for the end of spring, delayed, and then kicked off in June. But again, the objective was the seizure of Melitopol, severing the land corridor from Russia proper to Crimea. And we're continuing. And we're here. We're today, or yesterday, July 4th. So again, after a 30-day offensive, and usually when you launch large-scale, multi-brigade military operations, within a week to 2 weeks in maneuver warfare, you are looking for success. You are looking for a breakthrough. At no point was the Russian line broken. So this is obviously very concerning for Ukrainian forces, and even more so for Ukraine's handlers in the West, the United States, Poland, Germany, France, the United Kingdom. The billions and billions and billions, I sound like Carl Sagan, spent on the Ukrainian military, propping up the Ukrainian government, was very much hoping for a breakthrough on this offensive. Didn't happen. There were many Western-trained brigades that have spent months in Poland, the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany, Grafenwehr, in these large training areas preparing for this much ballyhooed offensive. It failed. Now, as we speak, the Ukrainians have shifted focus from the failed operation south of Zaporizhia. They're now very much focused again on Bakhmut. Bakhmut has become the area of focus because the Ukrainians believe they could possibly have more success near Bakhmut. Now, this is important. I want to go back again to where we were, where you, the viewer, can see exactly what's happening near Bakhmut as well. So we're going to go back to June 4th, and we're going to look exactly at what has transpired near Bakhmut. Now, this goes back to the start of the initial Ukrainian offensive, and obviously this is Bakhmut. What we can do here as well is go to the satellite view, so you can clearly see Bakhmut. You can see the Russians control Bakhmut. The Russians are starting to set up defensive positions in and around Bakhmut, to the north of Bakhmut, south of Bakhmut. The forces that are now involved in the defense of Bakhmut, to the north, you have elements of the 18th Motorized Rifle Division. In Bakhmut itself is actually not PMC Wagner, but they are Russian airborne forces that are now in Bakhmut, and they continue to be in Bakhmut as we speak after those Wagner forces were removed from Bakhmut or pulled out of Bakhmut. So here we go, from June 4th to where we're at now. And again, the message that is being articulated by the Ukrainian state is that there is success near Bakhmut. Bakhmut is in the process of being enveloped and retaken by the Ukrainian military. So here we go. So yes, in the north, you can see some success by Ukrainian forces. A little bit of push in the south. Push up here further to the north-northwest. You can see here the Russians pushing back and retaking territory. The Ukrainians pushing further east. And this is where we're at now. So again, if we go back and we look from essentially the start of the very beginning of June to now where we're at in July 4th, July 5th, the amount of terrain taken by the Ukrainians, and this is a gray area, right? This is where the fighting is continuing, is 2.8 kilometers. 2.8 kilometers to the north of Bakhmut. In the south, much of this had already been taken by the Ukrainians and continues to be taken. So essentially, 2 or so kilometers taken in the south. And that's kind of where we're set. And then you can get a picture of the units, the Russian units that have been moved in. So you have elements of the 106th Guards Airborne Division, the 98th Guards Airborne Division to the south. You have a detached regiment, 80th Guards Red Banner Tank Regiment, 4th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, 83rd Separate Guards Air Assault Brigade, 72nd Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, 11th Separate Assault Brigade, and then to the north, elements of the 18th Motorized Rifle Division, 200th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade. You got elements of Storm Z, and the 60th Separate Motorized Rifle Battalion, probably a Novorossiya unit. And that's kind of where we're set today. And then again, the main Russian defensive line sits well back from Bakhmut. Remember, the Russians took Bakhmut, a smaller city, but if you look at what has recently transpired in the course of the conflict, the Ukrainians haven't really taken any comparable large cities within the last few months. And yeah, you can go back to Kherson, where the Russians vacated, and you could point to that. But ultimately, that was not a battle. There was no battle for Kherson. The Russians pulled out and capitulated Kherson without a fight. It wasn't a fight. The Ukrainians fought tooth and nail for Bakhmut in some dire urban combat, and ultimately were defeated. And yes, the Ukrainians were defeated. Anytime you have one side that is actively defending an area with everything they have, and then you have the other side trying to take that city or that battlefield objective, and that other side is able to take that battlefield objective, that is called a military victory. It is what it is. And then if you look at where the main Russian defensive line is, And again, if this was a quote-unquote Russian supporting site, obviously you would see all this in green or blue, as if the Russians had pushed forward and taken all this terrain. Well, you won't see it because this is a Ukrainian supporting site. That's why you see what you see. But if we were to go back to the main Russian line of defense and then go all the way to what is now the line of contact, the Russians pushed forward 24 kilometers. Was it brutal, heavy fighting? Yeah, it was. But ultimately, they accomplished their mission. Again, as for the Ukrainians, the major operation in the south was not accomplished. The breakthrough of those Russian lines did not occur. They are still, if you look at just Tokmak, which was just the initial plan to roll into Tokmak in about 10 days after June 4th, and you look where the Ukrainians currently are, they're 23 kilometers outside of Tokmak still. Now they're, obviously they are trying to do probing attacks and they continue operations in these areas, but it's nothing like at the onset of the offensive operation, and that's kind of where we sit today. So just wanted to look at that, show this to you, the viewer, just kind of where we're at, just what the Ukrainians have succeeded, and then again, this upcoming meeting in Vilnius, Lithuania, it would be interesting to be a fly on the wall as they discuss future plans. Because at this point, at least in the military circles of NATO, they fully understand that the only way to win, especially in the south towards Zaporizhia, is going to be the introduction of NATO aircraft. Is it going to be the Polish? Is it going to be the United States? Is there going to be some sort of provocation near the nuclear power plant at Ernhodar? Difficult to say. But NATO fully understands that the status quo, in terms of what the Ukrainians are getting in terms of military weaponry and their military capability as it stands, is not going to be able to break through the Russian lines. And at the same time, they also understand that the Russian host is expanding. The Russian military is getting bigger. Its military-industrial complex is expanding. And at a certain point, that balance is going to tilt, where at least in terms of manpower and equipment, the Russians are going to be able to launch very large-scale offensive operations against Ukrainian forces. And they know that. So I'm sure there is one side that is saying, let's talk, let's have a conversation with the Russians. There's no end to this in terms of a military solution. Then obviously there's another side that's saying, hey, look, we need to go all in. We need to get the Ukrainians an air force or find a way to become directly involved in this conflict, which means World War III. That's where we stand for today. More to come very, very soon. And as always, have a good day.